Welcome to Charts This Week. My name is David Linton, I run Updata, and this week's edition for Monday the 22nd of August comes to you from London. And we start as always by looking at crude oil. Really quite a strong showing in crude in the last couple of weeks, and that really is against what we'd normally see in the seasonality. We did actually have this same spike up in August last year where we rose from about low 40s back up to the mid 50s. So we did sort of see that sort of $12-13 appreciation last year, and it looks like something similar has happened this year. Of course, there we see it last year, and then we fell away heavily in the final quarter. So this 52.50 level pretty important, and that's the key. You know, will we break that level? And given the seasonality, we still believe that's unlikely. But we have got a short-term rally nonetheless. Here we see the correlation with the dollar. That's negative. That's the territory that we expect to see. Commodities go up, dollar goes down, and if the dollar rises, then commodities generally fall. So if we see a rise in the dollar, that may kick in. Here we see on the daily chart we are just back above the cloud, and this time last year we didn't do that, so this is a bit different. So it's whether we can hold these levels and see crude values falling back below the cloud. This might just be a temporary breach. We are back below the $50 level this morning, down 1.8%, so that's on Brent crude. So we may have just seen an end to this run for a while. If we look at the seasonality, of course, it is the bearish time of year. We see this little kick up here. We've done a bit more than that in the price, but we do expect crude to fall quite heavily in the last quarter. If we look at the 60-minute chart, we see here how we did have this big bullish move over the last couple of weeks, and if we do the trends and targets, just hit the T key on your system, we see that we did have an upside target of $50, which was given back at about 47.30, given and met, in fact just slightly exceeded. So that is quite bullish action. And if we look at WTI, Texas Light crude, we see here that we do have this downside target, 45.70, not yet activated. Very similar picture as you would expect between the oil products. And just to look at the 1 minute chart, if you're trading crude at all or watching it closely, 48.65 on Brent, another 2.5% downside, has been activated and then trend just broken. So it looks like this week we might see crude prices coming back off those highs. If we look at US NatGas, the chart is long-term bullish. We made that transition, but we hit the $3 mark and we've really struggled to get back above that. Here we see on the daily chart, the seasonality is not great at this time of year. We did fall back from that $3 level back to the 250s, so quite a big fallback in July and the last several weeks. We are at a point where we're just consolidating now, and although we do expect with this seasonality that we might see some further falls. If we look at the 60-minute chart, we see big moves down, sideways moves, big moves down. So we are just seeing some downward pressure there. 236 is the downside target if we make new lows below 256, so keep an eye out on that. And of course, if you're trading NatGas at all, the 1 minute charts, just press the T key, and again we've got 237, and that is activated, so there is likely downward pressure. Down at the bottom right hand corner here, this changes the box size. So you can see here we've got 268 as an upside target. Go back to that 237, 280, 278. These targets are still there, so you know we can't ignore them, but the trend is down at the moment, so crude could go NatGas could go either way. If we take a look at European gas products, European gas in the last several weeks, really big sell-offs in the price, as we're seeing pretty well on all products. If we look at NBP front month, they're either off your Trayport screen, or of course you can run off the Updata energy feed, which is real-time consolidated broker data. Here we see the correlation between NBP coming from that OTC data, and Brent crude, where this data is coming from Thomson Reuters Icon. So mixing and matching your terminals to give you this, and we see here the correlation is just slightly negative, meaning that NBP is not really following crude very much at the moment, and we see here quite big falls in the price over the last few weeks. Have we reached a bottom here? Hard to say. If we look at the 60-minute chart, there we see we're still very much in a downtrend. If we press the T key, we don't have any real new targets to show off. Just adjust the box sizes here. A new downside target of 21.20 if we do make new lows. So we do need to be aware that we could be coming all the way back on NBP. Really, the chart to look at is the 1 minute chart. Again, press the T key, whether it's coming off your Trayport screen or the Updata energy feed, and we see here that we do have mixed targets as well. Go to a smaller box size, and the picture is hard to call because we just do have very small targets in either direction. So a difficult call there, but it does look like it might be oversold. If we look at in the short term, we might get a little bit of a reprieve, but this sell-off is pretty aggressive. If we look at the TCF charts, is NatGas. This is the daily chart back into negative territory below the cloud. So we need to be aware of that we are making new lows here, and a lot has unwound just in the last few weeks. German products looking pretty bearish as well. If we take a look at power, let's look at the calendar contract on German power. Was looking quite good, but we are now just starting to fall out of bed here. And if we look at the prices, we're just testing these low levels that we saw back in June. So it is a bit worrying. We are above the cloud, so that's still bullish, but we do need to be now aware that the prices are moving back below the cloud. So this could be the end of that run in German power. If we take a quick look at the 60-minute chart, here we see again very much below the cloud. Big moves down, sideways, big moves down. Press the T key on your system. 25.20, 25.30 downside targets. That's what we call a cluster. So we are seeing another 2% downside potential there on the 60-minute chart. So in the short term, German power not looking so good. Of course, if you're if you are trading power, then the 1 minute charts will give you the targets as well. 25.50 is the target that we're looking at the moment. So more downside this week potentially on power. And if we look at French baseload, we're seeing much the same scenario there as well. So if we look at currencies, the dollar is just showed a little bit of strength towards the end of last week, coming off a bit this morning, but and hitting this cloud on the 60-minute. Of course, the dollar on the daily chart, if we look at the daily cloud, we are just below on the price, but still above on the lagging line. So that's medium-term bullish still, and we are just seeing prices coming through on the cloud here. The euro is below the cloud still, so even though we had quite a strong recovery in the euro the last couple of weeks, we're not through on the daily chart. On the 60-minute we are, so euro dollar looking bullish in the short term. Press the T key on your charts. We do have this downside target to €1 to the dollar if we make new lows below this 109 level. So no signs of that at the moment. We are in a short-term uptrend, but we do need to be aware of that. And of course, if you're watching the currency very short-term, great around announcements to be looking at these short-term charts. I'm often doing that myself on sterling and others. Here we see that we do have some upside targets which are dominating in the very short term. Of course, this chart can change just in the matter of an hour, so it's even a few minutes. Very short-term chart. If you look at sterling looking still pretty bearish on the cloud. One thing that we did put in our sterling report to clients last week, quite worried that we have activated this new downside target to 94. We would still look to 108 first. We've got a downside target of 125. If you're on Bloomberg, the data is slightly different. That's 128. We do have these downside targets here, so that's quite worried. But we'd look to 108 first. The fact that we have activated this target last week, we did actually recover a bit towards the end of last week on sterling. But it is worrying now that we have activated a new downside target. Remember, those are very long-term targets here. So we moved down on the 60-minute chart, but we're up on the current trend. So it looks like sterling is still just putting in a little bit of a recovery here against the dollar. If we look at the short-term targets, it's a picture of could go either way. We've got downside to 126.30, this 128 target not yet activated, and 133.80. So 2% upside, 3.6% downside. Could go either way. Keep an eye on the 1 minute charts if you're looking at sterling very closely. If we look at the euro sterling chart, here we see 86 is the level. Really has been quite an appreciation over recent weeks, and that's translating to around 115 on the inverted chart. Norwegian kroner is actually looking stronger, buying more euro this week, and the Swiss franc is fairly neutral. And if we look at sterling Swiss, interestingly that we have been seeing new lows being made on sterling against currencies like Swiss, Aussie dollar, euro. So the fact that it's making new lows against those currencies suggests we may well see that against the dollar as well. Last of all, we take a look at stock markets. So US stock market still looking pretty bullish. Bullish on the long-term charts here, weekly, daily, 60-minute, bullish on all time frames. The short-term chart just giving a heads up for what might happen this week. We've got upside potential to 2250, say, so that's 3.3%. We do have this little downside target not yet activated, so at the moment we'd favour the upside, but it is true that US markets just are a bit stagnant right now at the time of year. If we look at NASDAQ, we see here on this chart as well that we've got bullish on the weekly, bullish on the daily, bullish on the 60-minute, upside target not activated and downside target not activated. These targets quite compelling, quite a few of them, more than actually S&P. So again, that's quite bullish from that perspective. If we look at FTSE, here we see FTSE's through on the weekly, so that's now a long-term bullish. Through the daily is bullish, and the 60-minute chart is just finding support in the cloud there, so that's looking fairly bullish in the short term as well. And we take a look at those short-term targets. We do have 7,079, 7,200. These would be new highs, so we might see in the coming weeks and months FTSE making a new all-time high. If we look at the DAX, again, the picture here is not quite as bullish as sterling, not yet above on the weekly, and the daily is bullish. The 60-minute is bullish as well, but a bit more of a mixed picture on the DAX. We do have downside and upside targets, so we need to be aware that the DAX has just got a little bit more work to do than the FTSE. Turning to Asia, we look at first of all the Nikkei, still bearish in the long term, just starting to turn bullish in the medium term and bullish in the short term. Downside targets hanging over us and very clear downside targets and hitting resistance here in the medium term. Upside potential of 11% and downside potential of 3%. So it is looking better in the short term, but it's still early days. If we take a look at the Chinese market, been quite worried about China. It's been bearish in the long term for quite some time. We are now through on the medium term chart and the 60-minute chart. We do have these downside targets hanging over us, and we have got quite strong resistance here, and a new little downside target just been activated here, down another 1.5%. So not extremely bearish, but it's still not one of the better looking markets. India is looking good, bullish on the weekly, bullish on the daily, bullish on the 60-minute, and we do have quite good upside targets here, especially on the 60-minute chart, quite a few short-term upside targets there, so keep an eye on that. And if we look at the Australian market, Australia has been quite interesting in that we are just coming through on the weekly and on the daily and on the 60-minute. Mixed targets here. We've got an upside target and 7.4% upside. Last of all, we look at gold. Gold is bullish on the weekly, bullish on the daily, but has turned quite bearish on the 60-minute chart. We still haven't quite activated this new target here, and we do have a downside target. Looks like gold might come back to the low 1300s, but at the moment the picture is pretty much bullish in the long run. So an interesting picture there for gold, but we might just see a sell-off there. That's it for this week. Until next week, happy charting. See you then.